All right, well, good morning and good afternoon to everybody joining us today, and welcome to our webinar on lessons learned in business continuity and resilience. We are thrilled for this very salient topic today. So what I'd like to do is start with some little housekeeping items, as we typically do. Just as a reminder, audio is available through the computer or dial-in. We do have everybody's lines muted. However, I would like to say that we would love to encourage your questions and your comments at any time. And we do have some time set aside at the end to address all your questions, or as many as we can get to, during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So do send those in via chat. And speaking of questions, one of the most common questions that we get is, well, will I get a copy of the slides and the recording? And you will. So we will send, as part of our follow-up communications, a link to the recording as well as the slides that we will publish on our resource library following the session today. So without further ado, let me go through the agenda that we plan to cover today. We have just a brief welcome and introductions. I'd like to introduce you to our guest speaker for the day. I also wanted to provide some context setting from our research, from our recent annual priorities and trends survey. And then we're thrilled to pass it off to our guest speaker, who will be talking about lessons learned in business continuity and resilience. As I mentioned, we do have some time set aside for Q&A. And as we typically do, we've got some links to related resources and contact information, which includes our guest speaker's new recently published book. So very exciting and excited about that. So what I wanted to do is start out with some brief stage setting, including why this topic today, why now, and introducing our speaker. And speaking of introductions, I guess I should start by just briefly introducing myself. My name is Rachel Collins, and I am the Principal Research Lead for Financial Management at APQC. The webinar piece, excuse me, the visual piece of the webinar is a little new to us. So maybe some of y'all have only heard the voice and not seen, but here we are. And anyway, I'm just thrilled to be facilitating this session today. As I was speaking with a colleague the other day in terms of, why this topic, why now, for some reason, all I could think about and what came to my mind was that scene from the first Ghostbusters. And, for all of us, I think this year has really been a doozy, is the word I like to use. And so this particular scene, the Ghostbusters are coming into the mayor's office. They're up against the Environmental Protection Agency. They're trying to win his support to get out of jail and to get to work. And Dr. Peter Venkman there talks about, the situation is dire. It's human sacrifice. Dogs and cats are living together. It's mass hysteria. I don't know. I felt a little bit like that over the past year. I don't know about you. And humor helps me to kind of, make it, I guess, and provide some hope in everything that's going on today. But from our research, while we haven't had, ancient Babylonian gods bent on destroying the world and giant marshmallow men destroying the city, in reality, we have had, in all seriousness, a lot of serious and deadly risks that the finance function practitioners have on their mind. So this slide comes from our most recent annual finance function priorities and trends survey. And what you can see is the listing of some of the biggest risks that the respondents said that they are concerned with and that they're preparing for in the coming years. Everything from, the current pandemic that we're still dealing with, the associated recession, to disruptions in the supply chain, and many other risks that are listed there for you. Furthermore, in that same survey, we asked about what have been and what are some of the anticipated effects of the pandemic on organizations. And what you can see in those first two charts is that obviously the pandemic had some very serious negative effects on many, not all, but many businesses over the past year and in the forecasted short term. So on the chart on the left, you can see about 2/3 of the respondents to the survey said that COVID-19 mandated shutdowns resulted in decreased revenue currently. And 59% said that COVID-19 is negatively impacting their business in the short term. That's now, because at the time we were asking them over the next 12 months. That's now. But in the chart on the right, some good news is that the outlook of the survey participants is a little more positive. So we see only about a third of the survey respondents feel that the pandemic has had a negative impact on their business over the longer term. And furthermore, another third said that they feel like the long-term outlook is actually positive as a result, perhaps, of some of the changes that they've made over the past year. But one thing I would say is that this data, I think, again, reminds us that it's never too late to learn something new about business continuity and resiliency. These should be pervasive topics and processes that we pay attention to all the time, not just when things are dire or when they're in turmoil or when we have a doozy year, as I mentioned earlier. So again, setting the stage in terms of definitions. Well, what do we mean by business continuity and resilience? And this is from our cross-industry process classification framework. It's a generic taxonomy of all operational and support processes within an organization. So many of you are familiar with our PCF. If you're not, it's our most downloaded piece of content on our website, available to any organization, any person in the world. This is how we define developing and managing business resilience. It includes things like developing the business resilience strategy, performing continuous business operations planning, and maintaining continuous business operations. By business resilience strategy, we mean things like identifying the tasks that help to identify and prioritize the overall risk to the business, determining how those risks relate to critical business processes, and creating and maintaining a risk mitigation strategy. In terms of performing continuous business operations planning, some of the processes or activities that we include there would be things like evaluating the current continuity, availability, and the recovery capabilities for enterprise architecture, identifying those gaps between the current capabilities and the desired state, and designing and implementing resilient enterprise architecture to enable continuous business operations. And then finally, of course, there's the important piece about maintaining your continuous business operations. And that's what include things like executing your business resiliency projects, testing and maintaining the business resiliency plan, and executing the recovery plan. So over the last year, needless to say, we've had a lot of interest from our members and our customers in this topic, which leads me to introduce our guest presenter today. Michele Turner has more than 25 years of experience in the areas of governance, risk, and compliance. She has her Master's of Science degree in Business Continuity from Norwich University, and she's the head of Global Business Resiliency for a large global e-commerce company. In this role, she's developed a framework and a methodology for business continuity, providing leadership for the team, crisis management, and resiliency management, which includes workplace resiliency within her organization's environment. And prior to this, she actually led the governance, risk, and compliance and business continuity roles with another very large global organization, initiating the operational risk management vertical for that organization. She's also an international speaker on the topic of business continuity, risk management, and related areas. She's a requested guest lecturer at the University of Washington on topics like cybersecurity and operational risk. And she's a course instructor and board director for the Disaster Recovery Institute International. She also provides input as director of giving within that organization's foundation. And she's a member of the Conference Board's Business Continuity and Crisis Management Council. So with that, I would like to hand the presentation off to Michele.
Well, thank you. Hello, everyone. Looking forward to chatting with you a bit. The very first thing that I want to do is actually take us through a bit of a brain teaser. So I'm going to flip the slide here, and I will give you 20 seconds to provide the answer that I'm going to ask you for. And yes, I will be counting out loud. So please take a look at this and identify all of the F's. 1, 2, 3, 4. As I said, I'm going to count during it. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And since I spoke in the middle of there, I skipped 5, but I definitely know that 5 comes before 6. But I tell you what, I counted during that, and then I know it was somewhat distracting. I did that on purpose because disasters, as they occur, they're very distracting, very disrespectful. So if you could submit your responses there, as Madison mentioned in the chat, how many F's do you see in this particular area, in this particular sentence? How many people saw maybe 4 F's? Just go ahead and jot something down in the chat there. 4 F's. How many people saw 4 F's?
Looks like right now we're seeing that guests or attendees are seeing 5 and 6 F's.
Okay. All right.
I saw 2.
I saw 2, Michelle.
Okay, very good. So here's the deal. There are actually 6 F's in this sentence. And it's interesting because the human brain tends to turn the F's into V's at times. And so I'll count them off. Finished is the first F there. Files is the second F. Of, a lot of people miss the of. Of is the third F. Of, fourth F. Scientific is the fifth F. And then of there on the bottom is the sixth F. And again, people see the word of and they automatically see a V for some reason. They don't see the F. I call this out because at times, from a continuity and a resilience perspective, there are those that are engaged that will only see 1 or 2 items. Maybe from a disaster recovery perspective, you will only see the IT focus or the systems focus. Or if you are a business team, maybe you will only see the business process or the procedures. The reality is all of us really need to connect and make sure that we're sharing information with each other, sharing lessons learned, if you will, to ensure that we can all have the full picture. And so for me, the book, Lessons Learned, Short Stories of Business Continuity Short Stories of Continuity and Resilience, this is really about sharing the lessons learned. I chose to weave both personal as well as professional lessons into the message because it shows integration. And for me, when you think of work-life, a lot of people immediately say work-life balance. Well, for me, it's work-life integration. I tried the whole work-life balance thing, and that almost killed me, literally. And so I really focus on integration because it's the ability to meld those two together. Family will always be priority for me, so I don't want to say that I'm balancing it necessarily. So how do I meld those two together? How can I be successful in doing that? So with that, my hope is that through this book, others will also see that they are not alone in some of the challenges or the successes that they've had, some of the ways that they were trying to balance versus integrate. And really the book is meant for everyone, not just resiliency or continuity professionals, because we are all parsing through various pieces of information in this thing called life. And PARSE is actually the outline that I have used to structure the book. PARSE stands for prepare, assess, remediate, sustain, and examine. And I've used this outline in organizations just to sort of get really clear. I love acronyms, but to get really clear on exactly what we would be tracking to as we look to develop the business continuity or the resiliency effort. So as I go through the slides, there will be 5 areas that are noted in the book. The book actually has 7 chapters. Each chapter represents a letter of PARSE. The additional 2 chapters represent education, and the personal title or subtitle is It's Never Too Late, and the focus of upward and onward. So just wanted you to be aware that while the book has 7 chapters, we'll be going over 5, and I'll just speak to the other 2 chapters just at a high level. So with that, let's go right into Prepare. Prepare is the first focus, the first chapter. The full title of this is actually Prepare, Fall 7 Times, Stand Up 8. And the quote that I have here, planning is bringing the future into the present so that you can do something about it now. And the reason for this is I take a look at Prepare. I give a personal example around how my family prepared me to, again, go through this thing called life. I had my aunt who I used to always ask those questions, but why can't I do this? But why can I do that? But why can't I go to school and I'm only 4 years old? And she was actually an educator, and she said, you know, Mickey, which is my nickname, I tell you what, I think you can. And so she actually sponsored me to begin school at 4. And so I graduated just a little bit early. But with that, from a professional perspective, looking at all of the sponsors and supporters, I wanted to really identify the difference between the two. So a supporter is someone who definitely, they support you, they will give you great insight, great feedback. But from a sponsor perspective, that is the person that's going to be in those other rooms, really talking about you in a positive manner when you're not there. And having a sponsor from a business continuity program and resiliency program perspective is extremely important. You want to make sure that you have someone there that is not only supportive, but sponsors the program, that will be in other areas and really speak to the positivity around this program, that will engage others, that will also be an evangelist to a certain extent. And it's really important as you're going through the business continuity process to make sure that you have clarity on exactly those key team members who will need to be engaged. I've just put a quick visual here of the RACI, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen RACIs with your organization, but really making sure that you're clear on those who are responsible, those who are accountable, those that you need to consult, and those that you would need to inform. That is extremely, extremely important. So from a 3 C's perspective, clarity is the first C, and that's really where, again, we make sure that we understand who really needs to be involved. How do we need to make sure that we engage them? What's the core direction? Why do we even need a business continuity program in the first blessed place? We want to make sure that we have a real good understanding for what things have happened in the past, that had we had a more proactive approach to things, or had we had procedures documented that we could have moved down the line a little bit quicker, how would that have helped us? And so we want to make sure that we are really, really clear on the reasons that we need to do this. From a communications perspective, we want to make sure that we are very, very clear on, again, who we need to engage, how we need to engage, how we need to make sure that we have the appropriate vehicles in place for that communication. So for some organizations, it could be the development of a steering committee or a governance committee, or whatever works in your organization. I have a few recommendations in the book, and I'll be speaking to some here. However, it's really what works best for your organization. And it's really about making sure that you can align the development of your business continuity program with the strategy for your org. Every organization is different, therefore, depending on whether you're a financial institution or other, you really want to make sure that you understand why it's important for your organization. How can you align the strategies that you're developing for business continuity with the strategy for the organization? And then the last C is cost. So at this point, when you're really developing the structure, you don't exactly know what you don't know. But there are things that you can identify to say, you know what, based on the challenges that we've had in the past, we know that we will probably need to have an alternate facility, perhaps, where we need to recover our critical services. So do a little bit of homework there. Make sure that you understand what the costs could be associated with that at a high level. There's a potential for you to use a software to house all this information. You could use SharePoint or some other, but if you are going to go the software route, make sure you provide them some information on what that could look like. If there are training modules that you'd like to develop. So do your homework, understand at a high level what things you will need to have, and give them a general timeline with an understanding that you will probably come back and tweak that timeline based on some things that you find out. The more you know, the more you grow. So you'll want to make sure that you're able to address that. So those are some of the core things when you're looking to prepare a business continuity or resilience program. So the next area is assess. And from a subtitle perspective, I have this noted as slow down in order to speed up. The quote, the hurrier I go, the behinder I get. Actually, Lewis Carroll put that in Alice in Wonderland, the book Alice in Wonderland. However, for me, it was a saying that I heard a lot throughout my life. My grandmother was Pennsylvania Dutch, and so there were a lot of different types of quotes that she had that I might not have heard in other areas. So in this one, it's really about ensuring that you assess the risk within your organization. So from a personal perspective, as I mentioned, for me, work-life balance was not a term that I used. I tried to speak to that term and it almost killed me. In this instance, personally, I needed to definitely slow down. I was going so fast, it actually caused a health scare. Pulmonary embolism, actually, where I was just moving, and I refused to stop until I had to, until I couldn't walk upright. And even then, when I got to the hospital and they were attempting to help me and get me straight, I had something to say there. Just give me a pill. I want to. I have a meeting tomorrow with the C-level. And the doctor stopped me and said, you know what, do you mind, Ms. Turner? We would really like to save your life if you don't mind. So again, slow down in order to speed up. Do the assessment along the way. So when you talk about susceptibility, think through the risks that your organization is actually susceptible to. Understand first that in order to complete the risk assessment, you need to start to understand what that threat is. So for example, if you're in Kansas, you might have a threat right off the top of tornadoes. And so if you know that you have the threat of tornadoes, think through those areas that are most vulnerable to that and what controls you would need to put in place to be able to address that. As we go through, we really need to take a look at the significant impact that would have on our organization. So for me, in my personal situation, I talked about the impact of not being here, basically, in terms of my not slowing down. But there's a way, and there's a template in the book as well for this. Think about the different impacts from a customer, from a regulatory, from an organizational perspective, but think about those impacts and then maybe align numbers to those impacts so that you can do some formula and understanding of high, medium, and low. The other key area here is likelihood. How likely is this particular threat initially and then risk as you move forward? How likely is that to occur at this particular organization? And then the controls. What controls do you have in place? Now, as you're going through this, and if you choose to use a formula, impact times likelihood is actually the inherent risk rating. No matter what you do, this is inherently, if you do nothing, this is what it is. When you are doing your calculations, you want to include the controls area. And once you say impact times likelihood and you're able to take a look at the controls that are associated with that, then you're able to come up with the residual risk. Residual risk is that risk that after you've applied those controls, this is what we're looking at. Ultimately, you want to make sure that you really build the risk profile. And here is just an example of how you might plot it. So depending on the formula that you have identified, you would, for example, impact times likelihood. Let's say that we were using a scale of maybe, I think we were using 1 to 3. Plot what that number would be initially, and then take a look at the control that you have in place. Now, as you begin plotting, you'll either determine whether or not the risk is high, in the red area, whether it's medium in the yellow area, or whether it's green or there's no color. Green means that it's probably a risk, but you have enough controls in place that that is not a key concern. And so this is a really good way to identify exactly how you can build that profile. Now, as you build the profile, my recommendation would be to really get clear on, well, here was the threat and here's the resulting risk. This is the category, maybe high, medium, or low. Put a description of the risk and of the detail there, and understand the drivers that with these particular things in your environment, they would really continue to drive this risk and assist it in coming to fruition. Understand that impact detail. Get really clear on exactly what the impact would be to your organization, and then identify some mitigation tactics that you would take, or some actions. I like to make sure that I check on these at least on a monthly basis. Is it trending up? Are we having situations come into place that's actually feeding this risk? What do we need to do to address that? Is it trending down? So it's looking like the controls that we've put in place are really starting to make a difference, or is it stable? It's not really moving anywhere, but we still consider it to be a risk. What's key is making sure that you have an action owner associated with this particular risk as well. So many times we go ahead and we do all that homework, and then we don't include an action owner or time frame for completion. And then year over year, we're seeing the same exact risk. Well, if you don't have anyone directly assigned to be able to drive mitigation, that's what's going to happen. So really make sure that you identify the owner and the target time frame for completion. Now with that, I've also included some information here when you're talking about going through the assess phase from a business continuity perspective. This is potentially where you would start to drive some of that business impact analysis. And there are different schools of thought here. However, for me, that business impact analysis is really making sure that you understand what are those critical services that if I don't have, I am not going to be able to drive success within this organization. And by the way, once we understand those critical services, what are those services specifically? What is the impact if they're not conducted? Where are they listed from a primary location perspective? Where are they developed out of? And then identify the target time frame. In the event that there's a business interruption, day one, based on what you've considered to be, and there are terms like RTO, recovery time objective, based on what you've determined that time frame to be in terms of recovering that service as not to impact any service level agreements or other. When we need to recover day one, how many resources do we need? Recover day 5, how many resources do we need? And resources could be people resources. There could be equipment that you need to consider, software that you need to consider. There might also be engagement that you really need to focus on in terms of dependencies. We really need to make sure that we understand what makes these critical services tick, what's required. So as we go through that assess phase, the next thing we want to do is really pull all of that together. And for me, this is really about making sure that you have a solid strategy. And a lot of us have been dealing with this given COVID, unfortunately. But for me, from a life perspective, when I talked about remediation, I had to think through another strategy when I was involved in a reduction in force. And the quote I have here, don't confuse having a career with having a life. That's one thing that I needed to remind myself on the personal level. One thing that you need to remind yourself here from a professional perspective You want to pull the information that you gathered from both the risk as well as the business impact analysis, that assessment. You want to pull that together to make sure that you understand what your strategy truly needs to be. So for example, if through my research or assessment, I've determined that there really needs to be some quick time frames to recover this particular service. Maybe I've got minutes versus hours. Well, that would tell me that I probably need to have a strategy that would allow me to immediately begin that work. So maybe I have an active type of situation where I have at one site, things are going great and they're going at the same time at another site. I don't have any time for lag time, so they have to continuously go in that direction. Perhaps you have a situation where you begin to say, you know what, if I have a remote issue, a remote disruption or interruption to business, I need to think, where can I recover this particular service? So for example, if there is an issue in Manila and there's an issue with that region, can I go to another region, a remote area? Perhaps I have another site in Bratislava that I can recover my critical services there. Do I have the necessary cross training at that other site to be able to drive that effort? Are there language or time zone considerations that I need to think through? Again, are there other dependent locations? What are the dependencies, the critical functions? We're pulling all of this information in. So Remediate is really about identifying that alternate strategy. Now, when it comes to remediation, that then feeds directly into the sustain mode. This is where we say, well, it's a beautiful thing that you've identified all of these potential recovery strategies, but it won't amount to a hill of beans if it doesn't work. So in sustain, we're actually testing it. We're actually determining whether or not this is functional. The quote that I have here, life has many ways of testing a person's will, either by having nothing happen at all or by having everything happen at once. So when you talk about a significant test of our goodness, of our society, of everything else, COVID just goes right in there. COVID was is a significant test from a lot of different perspectives. And from a personal perspective, during COVID, my father has temporal lobe dementia. And so we were tested significantly because with dementia, having the sameness is something that is pretty critical. Well, with COVID, there was a lot of things that were just not his normal. And so we had to get really creative on how we could create something to assist him through the process. And there's an article that I wrote that's included in the book, and I'm more than happy to provide links to that. I think there are some links toward the end here. But that sort of tells the story of how I aligned business continuity practices to this particular situation. But right off the top, you need to make sure that from a planning perspective, you have done the work in planning what that test or that exercise needs to be. Now, some may say, well, shoot, using the example of COVID, how could we have planned for this? And I totally hear you. I would also challenge that there are certain situations like SARS, like swine flu, like MERS, where we had an opportunity to at least create something that could have been used as a jumping off point. So I understand that people, the word that's most usually used with COVID or the pandemic is unprecedented. And I understand that, but let's think through, what do we have in place that we could use as a jumping off point? I found it quite interesting that during the initial time for COVID, there were unfortunately, a lot of business continuity and resilience professionals that were losing their jobs. And I had to ask myself, why is that? This is it. This is not a drill. This is what we've practiced for. And the challenge is that a lot of what I find is that a lot of organizations they immediately saw this as an unprecedented event, and they immediately said, we need new stuff. This is a totally new situation. Old stuff won't work. Well, there wasn't the acknowledgement that there were some things in place that could have helped them initially get over that hump, that could have helped them make sure that they could streamline that work from home. So again, make sure that you leverage the planning. Make sure that you clearly identify what are the objectives that you're looking for with this particular test or exercise. Look at things like notification. How are we going to move forward in activating? Do we have the appropriate procedures? How do we really close this out? How do we know when the test is over? And then definitely ensure that you do a debrief. The templates here are also templates that are included in the book as well. Now, C's, we're going back to more C's. But here, when I talk about, in the article that I mentioned I wrote, I talk about collaboration and connection, celebration. Again, even in from a COVID perspective, collaboration, making sure that you are engaged with the Global Intelligence Unit, perhaps. They're boots on the ground, and they will probably know a lot of information that could feed into what you're going to have to share in terms of sharing with the business. Maybe there's the security team that will see exactly what's going on. Facilities, you'll definitely need to engage with them because they'll have to go in, ensure that the signage, from a COVID perspective, the signage was there, ensure that the hand sanitizer and other things are there. So there's a lot of collaboration that takes place. In addition to connection, we need to make sure that we provide those appropriate connections, and having the connection at time of disaster is not recommended. We want to make sure that we're developing those relationships well ahead. And that includes not only our internal, but if there's an opportunity for you to engage perhaps the fire department in some of the exercises that you do, so you can have a good understanding for what they would be bringing onto the campus. That's one example. At another organization, there would be campus days where the community would come on campus, and we would also have the police department come on campus, and that was a way to build the connection with the community, but also get a really good understanding for how those persons in authority would respond to a business interruption, what they would have to do on the campus. So collaboration and connection is key. Another thing that was key was being able to celebrate the wins when you can. So it's hard to think about celebration during COVID, but when you were able to identify those critical services and be able to have people do those services safely from home, you know what? That's a time for celebration. Identifying the mission critical sites, that in the event of a business interruption, this particular site can't go down. Now that we know that, let's make sure we have the appropriate controls in place to address our most critical asset, which is our employees, in terms of being on site and safe. So really make sure that you celebrate those small wins, or big wins, as it were. When it comes to continuity, I'll give you the personal example in terms of continuity. My father is very active in church, and so for him, thinking about not going to church during COVID was just, that can't be done. And so one of the things that I needed to do was make sure that at the facility where he is, I provided them with a laptop. And that laptop assisted in ensuring that there was continuity of the church service on Sunday and Bible study on Wednesday and everything else that he needed. But again, it's the ability to find that little spot of, and I hate to use the word normalcy, but what's that spot that you can track to, that you can ensure that you hold on to in terms of continuing your operations. And for a lot of people, that's really leaning on some of the business continuity plans that were developed and then enhancing those plans when they've learned more through COVID. One of the things that I feel that COVID has definitely brought to light we really understand what the priorities are, and I call this out from a personal as well as a professional perspective. We get to understand what those priorities are when you can't deal with certain things, and you can be okay with that. Guess what? That certain thing wasn't a priority. I will say though, I have found Uber Eats is now my friend, and so hey, Starbucks, I understand they're not a priority. I just like to have them around in terms of my morning tea. So with that, the next area that we're focused on is examine. And the quote that I have for this, life is a process of becoming. Combination of states we have to go through. Where people fail is that they wish to elect a state and remain in it. This is a kind of death. And so what that means is you will continuously be growing. You will be continuously learning new things. When it comes to the business continuity process, this process is really, it's a living document and it's a living process. You have got to make sure that as you learn more or as more things are included in your environment, you're baking those right on in. And while there's a recommendation for the update of the plan and the business impact analysis or the risk assessment, at least on an annual basis, I would say that if there are significant changes to the environment, contact names, maybe you've done an acquisition and you have a new critical area that's come on board, take that time to re-examine and to redo that business impact analysis or redo that risk assessment to ensure that you understand what you need to be including in your risk profile. When it comes to continuous process improvement, make sure that you have a way to monitor, track those particular areas. Dashboard development, what's your benchmark? What are the leading and lagging key performance indicators? Really something that says, here's how I am trending as appropriate. The subtitle for this particular chapter, again, continuous process improvement. How are we continuing personally to improve ourselves? How do we ensure that we're able to apply what we know on a regular basis? And then I've given some examples from a continuity perspective on how we can potentially continue to provide continuous process improvement. Now, when it comes to, I'll call it the bonus chapters in the book, there are two. Education, it's never too late. And just before you were speaking, Rochelle, about it's never too late to learn more things about business continuity. For me, I had to focus on that myself. It's never too late in terms of getting my degree. I needed to leave school a little bit early when I went through the first time from a college perspective. And so I just decided that I will still continue to track on and get my degree. And so over years, I eventually got my degree from Roosevelt, my bachelor's degree in professional administration from Roosevelt University. And it just so happens, everything happens at the right time, just so happens that Oprah Winfrey's assistant was graduating that very same year, and it turned out that Oprah was actually providing our speech and handing us our diplomas. And so again, it's never too late, everything happens at the right time, and I was able to have Oprah hand me my diploma and give me some really good insights in terms of life lessons and continuous process improvement, actually. Also, for me, one of the things that you need to make sure that you do is engage those, continue to go back to the other C's around collaboration and things of that nature. Continue to reach out and engage others as you're going through that education process. The last chapter is upward and onward, and that just means, you know what? The party doesn't stop here. There will always be something that will be included. Make sure that as you are continuing to drive efforts from a prepare, assess, remediate, sustain, and examine perspective, that you continue to speak up. When you see something that is a challenge within your environment, make sure that you call it out in those meetings. Make sure, I do mentoring as well, and some of the some of the comments are, well, you know, I'm new to the organization. I really don't know if I should say something or not. You are at that organization because you have something that will assist them in filling a gap in an area. So you are there for a reason. You are at the table, so speak up at that table. Take the risk. By that, if there are certain things that you feel will assist in providing process improvement, take that risk, take a calculated risk. Make sure that you identify what the impact will be and you understand certain controls that you have in place. But take that risk. Make sure that if it's something that will be for the betterment of your organization, that you include that. And then again, stay connected to the process, stay connected to the key contacts that you've engaged with. So a few things in terms of key things and what I'm hoping you might have gotten from some of this. Do your homework. You got to go back. You got to make sure, well, why do we even need a program in the first place? Make sure that you're assessing those risks. What's the impact, the likelihood? What controls do I have in place? What would happen if I don't put a control, if I don't mitigate this risk? Create viable strategies. Viable is a key word here, because sometimes within your environment, you say, you know what? Wow, there's this brand new spiffy alternate site, and I really want to be able to be at that site because they have all the bells and whistles. Well, you know what? If you don't need the bells and whistles, then there's no sense in going down that path. You want to make sure that you have room for stretch, but you don't want to have something that is perhaps so expensive that it really starts to impact your credibility, because then leadership will say, well, wait a minute, did we even need this? Why did we go that route? From a testing of the functionality perspective, think about viable here as well. When you're doing your tests or your exercises, make sure that you start simple. You want to add complexity as you go through. If you start with sort of the Godzilla Megadeth type of situation, if you start there, you could demotivate some of the team members, and that would be a significant challenge, because once they're demotivated, it's going to take them some time to come back. So start simple and then add complexity, assist in creating that mastery, and create continuous process improvement. Business continuity, resilience, these are not projects. There might be projects such as a risk assessment that you include in the program, but these are programs. These are continuous process improvement pieces. Business continuity is the gift that keeps on giving. So make sure that you identify that. Again, remember, prepare, assess, remediate, sustain, and examine. There's a link there to the book. So want to thank you for taking time out, and I think now's the time for questions, right?
That's right. Thank you so much, Michelle, for that great presentation. So just as a reminder to the participants on the line, if you have questions, please do ask those through the chat. And I may ask for your help with that as well, so you can monitor that. So just let me know. But I'm going to go ahead and start us off with some of the questions that we've received. So the first one, Michelle, is, and this is actually of interest to me since we just completed a best practices project on enterprise risk management. So the question is, how do you see business continuity and resiliency, the program that organizations, or that you're advocating that organizations create, how does this fit into an ERM program, or how does this differ for an ERM program? How does that sort of integrate?
Got it. Well, actually, business continuity is an operational risk. And so when you think about the enterprise risk management program, think about the different pillars that you have. So there could be strategic, legal, operational, financial. So there's definitely an integration to this. And what I would encourage you to do is ensure that you connect, if there's an enterprise risk management organization or a team in your organization, connect with them, share with them the process that you're going through to conduct a business continuity risk assessment. You want to make sure that there are no conflicts necessarily with an overarching process. There could be distinctions, but you don't want conflicts, and you want to make sure that you're able to just pull that into the process so that at the top of the house you can compare apples to apples. But again, the connection point that I see is making sure that you realize that business continuity is an operational risk and you need to make the connection with the appropriate team members.
Okay, excellent. That's a good distinguishment. So another question that we have, and maybe it does have to do with, with the pandemic and all of the risks that we've seen, particularly in the finance area, which is the research area that I work in, around fraud and payments and such. So how do you ensure that your business continuity program, gets beyond just the IT component of this? Because that's a big one. You mentioned the different sites and ensuring, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And when business continuity was born, so to speak, a lot of people it was born out of disaster recovery, which was really the system side of the house. And so immediately when people think about business continuity, they actually align it to disaster recovery. But the way that I think about it, business continuity is the umbrella, and you've got disaster recovery as one of the spokes, and you've got business recovery as one of the spokes. And the connection that seems to really, really help is when we're going through a business impact assessment, they identify what their critical services are. Well, in order to continue those critical services, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have some systems, some software to make sure that you're aligned there. So always make sure that you understand what those dependencies are, what you rely on in terms of systems to then enact the business process. Really, it's not one or the other. Typically, one can't happen without the other. So just make sure that if they're totally focused on the DR side, well, help me understand, why do you even have these systems in place? The systems are in place to assist our customers, and our customers are reliant on these core services. If you're looking at the financial area, you're looking at accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll for employees. So really make sure that you always tie it back to what services those particular systems are really supporting.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And I just a reminder, if you do have questions, please ping those on the chat for us. So I do see a couple of more questions here. And we've actually gotten this question in other venues as well, so I'm curious to get your take on it. The question is, what are some examples, perhaps, of some key risk indicators or KRIs that you might recommend that organizations consider monitoring or tracking? Any feedback on that one?
Well, so from a key risk indicator perspective, number one, it depends on the type of category of risk that you may be tracking to. So for example, if there are certain environmental risks that need to be considered, perhaps I have an alternate site, but guess what? That alternate site is in a flight path and it's in a floodplain. Well, guess what? I may need to take a look at some of those risks and really understand from a key risk indicator perspective what situations could occur that would impact my business. Align that to the drivers as well. So really think through another key risk indicator depending on whether you're in a volatile market. Maybe there are certain things that you need to consider that others wouldn't, that were in another financial institution. So there's one thing for being able to identify those key risk indicators per your industry or per your area. But the other thing that I would do is continue to focus on those emerging risks as well. There are certain things that are coming down the pipe that you know about, but you need to start planning for those today. So as you see something that may be coming down the pipe, there are certain things that could be implemented 2 or 3 years down the line. Start thinking about what the potential impacts could be. Are there regulatory impacts? Would there be a need to maybe add to staff to fulfill a particular effort? So I gave a few examples, and I hope that those meet the mark. If they don't, I'm on LinkedIn. Reach out and let me know. We can have a further discussion.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. This is kind of a related one, also along the lines of measures, measure frameworks, but I think perhaps the questioner is asking now more about perhaps the process. So if I misunderstand this, let me know. But the question has to do, what about in terms of like the compliance or in terms of the audit process? What kinds of KPIs do you see, or within your own organization, should companies be measuring in terms of like the compliance and the audit process in particular? Any thoughts on that? I know we're kind of maybe getting a little bit afield.
Well, it depends on the type of organization. However, it depends on what regulations or standards you may be looking to align to as well. If you have an organization that is looking at something like 22301 or some of the other standards, then your KPIs, your conversation with audit needs to focus on those things that would have to be recovered, that are dependent, that are aligned to that particular area. I'm going to go on a quick tangent and say, from an audit perspective, one of the things that I found to be extremely helpful is to actually have discussions with the auditors on what the audit plan is for the year. There's the potential that they have certain things on their audit plan that you've already done some significant work with. You can provide them information for their audit papers to show that there are no control deficiencies in X particular area. However, in this area, we have some challenges, and audit can definitely be your friend. You can have them take a look at the particular process and just make sure that they're able to go in there and provide assistance, but they may also need assistance in what business continuity is. And they may need assistance for your particular area. What are some of the key things that you need to take a look at in terms of disaster recovery or business recovery? And especially when you're taking a look at maybe SOC requirements, you want to really scope that appropriately, and you don't want them to go outside of that scope, because as you're developing the papers that you would need to show compliance, you could get yourself into some trouble if you step outside of that. So I gave some information around connecting with audit. I also gave some information around certain things to look for. But again, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn if you have any additional questions.
Yeah, thank you.
We're short on time, so I want to make sure we can get as many in as possible.
Exactly. And I'm not sure if we have time for this one last question. I think a lot of this you covered in your presentation, but the question was, what changes do you think organizations should make to their business continuity and resilience programs as a result of the pandemic? I mean, I think the big one is, the lessons learned and the reflection piece. Anything else there that you would add?
So, a couple of things. One, I think when you take a look at the recovery strategies, typically you look at local strategies, alternate site, remote or regional strategies, and you think, well, from a local perspective, that could just be, hey, if I have an immediate, maybe just an immediate blip on the radar and I just need to have people go home for a day, that's my local strategy, and they can come right back. This pandemic has caused us to expand our thinking to say, wait a minute, what if you're at home for a year and a half? As opposed to a few days or a few weeks or even a couple of months. And so I would encourage teams to really take a look at their risk assessment. I think that organizations will have to focus on the risk assessment, focus on what does it mean, what's the impact if we don't do this. And by the way, let's take a look at a variety of alternate strategies. If in the event that we need to be at home for a significant period over 30 days, what does that mean? Can I still continue to recover to manage my critical services from home? Are there certain things that I can't recover from a home base? And then if that's the case, what needs to happen? I would also say one of the things that the pandemic has taught us is that we need to do more collaboration and engagement. At the start of the pandemic, I saw a lot of organizations, there was confusion between, well, who needs to focus on this, and has security done this, or have other teams done that? There really needs to be a strong crisis management structure where you identify what the severity levels are that would trigger an incident into a crisis, and there needs to be set procedures on exactly who needs to be engaged and what some of the key things are that you need to do and how you will engage senior leadership. You want to make sure that there's a process for how you will engage them, because you will definitely need their support and, more importantly, their sponsorship of the program moving forward.
All right, well, excellent. Thank you for that. And I just want to, again, thank our speaker, Michele Turner, for speaking with us and sharing her lessons learned today. And we wanted to close out just with a reminder to the folks on the survey, if you could please take our brief satisfaction survey. Just takes a couple of minutes, and let us know your feedback about the session and any ideas maybe that you have for future sessions that would be of value to you. Also wanted to provide some related resources on this topic and related topics that you're welcome to link back to on our resource library. That first one there is actually Michele's book. And then finally, we'd just like to close out with contact information. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to myself or reach out to Michele via LinkedIn. So with that, thank you so much again to Michele and to everybody for joining us. And we just really appreciate your time to share your lessons and your learnings over this doozy of a year and even beyond. So take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.